In this episode of the Smart City Podcast, I had an awesome chat with Neil Glentworth. Neil is the Executive Chairman at GWI, and he is passionate about the ethical use of data to make informed decisions. Neil is also passionate about smarts happening in the regions, which of course I loved, so we had some great conversation about what the regions are doing in this space. As always, I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
It's the Smart City Podcast, whoa, with Smart City experts, here we go. Connecting smart technology, both big and small. Smart cities are making life better for all. Big data, emerging trends, self-driving cars and more. The Smart City Podcast is what you're looking for.
Good morning, Neil. How are you today?
Wonderful, Zoe. Thank you very much.
That's excellent to hear. Let's just jump straight into this. And can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you are passionate about?
Zoe, I am passionate about economics and data. So I don't get invited to a lot of dinner parties because all I love to talk about is data and economics and essentially how we can use data to make better decisions. So if it's data driven, that's me.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about what sparked your interest in the smart city space.
Well, now I'm going to veer off a little bit slightly from the script, as it were. The smart cities space, look, I find a bit of troubling with the whole smart cities. I'm interested in civic innovation. I'm interested in communities taking control of their social and economic well-being. GWI, which is one of the businesses I own, has been around for about 10 years, and we've been working in this space for quite a long time in terms of that civic innovation. But I've been fortunate in my career to have worked all around the world and have seen where communities have really taken control of their own destiny and the difference that it can make to them. So this is really an extension of a lot of things that I've done in my life, but I'm very fortunate now to have a company and the resources to help far more organisations and communities.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm interested to hear your answer for this next question, which is, what is a smart city to you?
A smart city to me is something that has nothing to do with technology. It has everything to do with community choice. That's a choice to interact with transport, to interact with buildings, to interact with open green spaces. It is a choice so that local governments, state governments, federal governments can make better decisions of the scarce allocation of resources, ultimately enabled by technology, but at its core, it's about people and everything to do with how people fulfill their social and economic needs.
Cool. Okay. So why do you think the smart city concept is so important?
Look, there's a lot of challenges in the Asia-Pacific region economically, and one of the phenomena that's caught a lot of demographers and economists off guard is urbanisation. So we see a massive groundswell in Australia of people moving to the coastal regions. That's leaving towns in Central Australia a real brain drain, and there is a real focus on reinventing those towns and those communities up and down the coast all around Australia. And so the incentive now is, how do you do more with less? Now, making use of data that's already available, it helps communities do more with less, whether it be making better decisions in terms of how to bring tourists in, whether better decisions how to use their assets so they don't become stranded assets. Essentially, local government, particularly in Australia, has a very small percentage of taxable revenue, which is less than 4%. And so that means that local government has to really think differently how it's going to attract, retain, and ultimately grow their populations.
Yeah, cool. So one of my passions is the regional areas. So I'm definitely keen to hear more about what your thoughts are about how we can do this in the regional areas. So let's talk a little bit about some of the projects and things you're currently working on.
So we're very fortunate here at GWI. We work on projects all across Australia, New Zealand, and even into Asia. And so we're working on projects from regional Queensland, regional New South Wales, capital cities, up in Northern Territory, right up and down the East Coast and around to Victoria. And these range from large communities, from communities that have had large in manufacturing base that have had to reinvent themselves, to communities that are suffering depopulation, in one case at 10% a year in those regional areas. And the civic leaders, the mayors, the councillors, even the state MPs and federal are really challenged how they can reinvent those regions. So we're dealing with everything. We're also working quite extensively where a lot of so-called plans have taken place, which are very technology heavy, and kind of detangling those in order to help citizens best understand where their ratepayer dollars are being spent.
Mm. Yeah, cool. So can you expand a little bit on some of those regional projects? What exactly, I know you won't be able to necessarily go into specific details, but maybe some broad concepts of what you're actually doing out in the regional areas?
Well, I'll give two, and as GWI is headquartered in Queensland, I'll just give two from Queensland so that help. So let's take one on the East Coast. So let's take the City of Rockhampton. City of Rockhampton has had some challenges over the years. You've got a rather trailblazing mayor and a very committed executive team. And essentially what they wanted to do was socially and economically activate the city of Rockhampton and make it a safer and more vibrant place. What we're able to do is bring all of the intersection of the social, the economic, the cultural needs together to make a far more activated space. And that's now on the riverfront in Rockhampton. That's now in the CBD. That's now with their innovation and civic innovation hub. That's the close relationships with Central Queensland University. So that's a real good example. If we come further down the coast, we have University of Sunshine Coast, and they're building an amazing new campus in the Moreton Bay region. And we're working very heavily with two local governments, university, and a whole range of suppliers, federal, state, to bring together the smart campus operation that University of Sunshine Coast is pulling together. And then if we suddenly take a left turn, if you're looking north and head, let's say 1,000 kilometres out west and take towns like Barcaldine, Longreach, Winton, where we're helping reinvent those economies. And recently in the media, you would have seen a big, large focus about the use of drones with wild dogs. And that's one example where we're working very closely with a region, making those things happen and bringing in new talent and new population to those regions.
Yeah, cool. Oh, that's really exciting. I you probably know that, yes, I'm very passionate about bringing that, lessen the brain drain and actually bring people out to the region. So we have to have exciting things going on out there. So I think some of the work you're doing will definitely help in that. So that's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about Australia and how do you think Australia, I mean, we can focus down into Queensland, but I know you work all across Australia. How do you think Australia is embracing the smart city concept?
Look, if I'm being really honest, I think superficially. I think there's a real challenge in Australia that we have some very big handbrakes on the wider economy. And there's a lot of superficiality about it. There are some communities who are really committed, really forward-thinking. But when the reality of so many jobs could face automation, there isn't the economic density. We actually need to double down on the whole focus of how we reinvent our urban environments and our regional environments. And I personally don't believe we're taking it as seriously as we could be because the impacts are so great. And let me give you one example. If I now could go to my local electrical store or mower store, I can buy a robotic lawnmower. And I can set that lawnmower, and you can buy them from Amazon, you can buy them from a whole range, Harvey Norman, wherever. And I can set that to run on my lawn. it won't take long before the community is wondering why there is a human being sat on a lawnmower in a park and their rates are still going up. And we need to tackle and have those tough conversations. And there doesn't yet seem the appetite. That said, I'm pleased to see that there are many who are willing to have that. And, one of our greatest dilemmas is finding the skilled people in actually to service the demand. We just can't find those skilled people.
Definitely. I think that leads on to the next question, which is how do you think we can better, integrate across the different disciplines, government, industries, so we can ensure that, we have the right skill sets, that kind of cross-disciplinary skill set for the smart city in the future?
Zoe, that is a wonderful question. And I listened intently to many of your podcasts, in particular the one with Marcus Forth, who is a real sort of fantastic person in this space. And I think it's the challenge of the generation of people that are going through university at the moment is changing that whole educational mix, is changing and recognizing that we need different skill sets so that we can bring engineers, we can bring building developers, we can bring scientists all together and actually focus in the one area of how do we better grow for urbanisation and how do we make regions more resilient. And Zoe, I know you're based up in Toowoomba in Queensland, and there's a wonderful gentleman, Professor John Cole, who looks after regional resilience, and he's working closely with people like that, people like Marcus Forth, and bringing them together so that we can actually make Australia a more place of greater economic depth and helping the community make better decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. No, I've got lots to think about now. I'm going to have to get the guy in Toowoomba here on the podcast as well.
You totally are. John Cole is incredibly impressive and has done a lot for regions and really brings us together, and along with the wonderful Marcus Forth that you've already got on. So.
Yeah, cool. I mean, and that's the thing. There are so many really smart people out in the regions. I mean, I haven't even done enough myself to kind of reach out that way as well. So I need to do that, because I think, like you mentioned with drones, I mean, that's not the only technology, obviously, but, smart farming and all those type of things is just, it just makes sense because it's more efficient and, they can save money and, save time and labor and all that kind of stuff. And they're not even talking about, oh, well, yes, I'm going to embrace the smart city concept. They're just doing it because it makes sense. So I think that's what's going to happen, particularly in the regions, in the cities as well. But in the regions, they're just going to do whatever makes sense. They're not going to worry about what the concept or the framework or the urban planners are telling them. They're just going to do whatever is the most efficient and effective and makes them feel that they can live and access things the way that they need to.
One of the mistakes that we can often make being city dwellers is discounting how advanced some of the regions are and also woe that the poor regions far from it. Based out of Longreach, there are 7 councils known as the Rapid Remote Area Planning Councils. They have long collaborated and are doing absolutely phenomenal work in making that region vibrant. And let me just give you examples. For many years, cattle have come up to RFID trackers. They come up to automated weigh stations. They are automatically tracked as they're weighed, and they're making better decisions. The use of drones has been quite extensive and for many years, and often we forget those places in regional Australia that are really doing it well. I'm about to spend, as of this coming Friday, I've got another 9 days out in the regions working with graziers, working with enormous data sets with them, bringing together different ways of working. But they're incredibly advanced and there is a lot going on. We just don't hear a lot about it. And it's a real shame because we think of this whole smart city notion as something that's urban, where actually regions are being reinvented and they're being really, really smart put together.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, let's talk about this next question, which is, what are the emerging trends? So I like to talk about the ones that other people aren't talking about. So do you have any thoughts on that?
So there is an enormous amount of emerging trends, but one of the things that I really am keen to talk about and get across, it goes back to my why I don't get invited to dinner parties much, is about data ethics. With everything that we're doing in this space where the Internet of Things, bringing together public, private data, is the ethical, moral use of data. And is that an emerging trend? No, but it's a real fundamental point when we think about machine learning, artificial intelligence. Just because you've got the data doesn't mean you should use it. And what I'm really pleased to see is there is a lot of thought being given to now about how ethical is it to use data as an emerging trend in this whole space. So just because you've got it, and let me give you an example of that. So for instance, if you can now better predict where areas are going to flood, should you tell everybody and their insurance premiums go through the roof? Or should you not tell them and they might get flooded? So you've got a real moral dilemma there. People are going to pay more for where they live in insurance. The house value will lower, but yet we can use data to tell us. And that's not as an easy decision as you think, because there is a moral dilemma there. Essentially, we can use data for good, but we can also use it to cause a bit of harm as well. So the real emerging trend is people are starting to deep think about the use of data.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's lots of ethical and moral challenges that we're going to face. But I think we face those every day with, we've accepted certain levels, and now there'll be different levels or different thresholds that we'll have to work out.
Absolutely, and that's a really great point, Zoe. Different thresholds, and there are some demographics in the community that care very little for their data being shared. There are others that care very deeply, and that's a really good point, because at the heart of anything smart where we use data is treating people as individuals, not as a group. So the real sort of tradition is everything is group based. We make the decision on the best behalf of the group. What the whole process allows now with extensive use of data is people to have more individual experiences, and thus public services are more individually orientated.
Yeah, definitely. So how do you think the new GDPR kind of fits into all of that?
The whole GDPR, license to print money if you're in certain sectors. Look, I think the impact is actually quite low in real terms in terms of compliance, because those businesses that have been acting ethical, no change. It is more making their customers aware that data basically is very much the customer's own. And at sort of GWR, we have this bit of a mantra, which is data is for a customer to own, not for anybody else to take. What it's actually done, the whole thing with Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, is it's brought it to the public consciousness that if you share something, that's it, it's gone forever. So the GDPR arrangements aren't fundamentally changing anything other than really getting people to think hard. Now, if somebody gets it wrong, that's where you'll see it really hit hard, because there is now a legal framework, particularly those companies passing through Europe, to actually take an act upon any breaches in data. But we'll wait to see when that actually happens. Well, the only other change is lots of emails in your inbox updating you.
Yes. I think one of the emerging trends, and you spoke about it a lot, was the regional areas. So the smart city, but it's actually a smart region. So I wonder do you see things? I mean, obviously things are happening, different things are happening in the regions and the cities, but do you see anything that's like really emerging in those regional areas that people are just completely oblivious in the city?
Yes, I do. It's a great question, Zoe, and I do. There is a very different level of resilience, and I mean that by community resilience. And again, in the regional areas where people just get on and make things happen. So let's take one business, for instance. There's a lady called Joy McClaremont called Off the Track Training. She's based on a property in the middle of nowhere, 100 kilometres from any town, and she's a personal trainer. and she provides personal training out to lots of other regional people online for a very successful model. People aren't now saying, I have to leave the regions. The tyranny of distance is gone through connectivity. And regardless of how good or bad the connectivity is, they're making the most of it. Recently, we've seen lots of footage of Lake Eyre in Australia having a deluge of rain, and we've seen the flora and fauna. All of that footage has come from people running commercial drone businesses out in regional Australia, where media companies are able to access that. Previously, it was very expensive to get out there. We're seeing businesses who find it hard to get parts for photocopiers or machines, print with 3D printers. And I know of 2 businesses out in Western Queensland that actually will print a part when a part breaks down on a tractor or a harvester or of some sort. So people are thinking different and are changing the game. And there is not enough attention on what's going on in the regions. If they got even a fraction of the money that is getting into the urban areas, they'd be in a far better place.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that. I love that. Awesome. Cool. Well, it's been so awesome to chat with you this morning, Neil, and I'm so glad that we had this conversation. I really just have one last question, which is, how can people connect with you?
People can connect with me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. They can email me direct. They can call me. I'm a pretty open book. Anybody who connects with me, I always take the time to chat to people. I have the luxury of being able to spend that time with people because I'm actually interested in learning off them rather than the other way around. So you find me, as I say, Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can email me all through the GWI website.
Yeah, cool. I'll put all those links and everything in the show notes so people can click away and get in touch. So thanks again for coming on to the Smart City Podcast.
And thank you, Zoe, and congratulations on the ongoing of your podcast. It is excellent.
Thank you so much. Look forward to talking to you soon.
It's the Smart City Podcast. Whoa!
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart City Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes can be found at thesmartcitypodcast.com. If you have any questions or comments for me or any of my guests, connect with me via email, zoe@thesmartcitypodcast.com, or via the socials. I'm on Twitter and Facebook @SmartCityPod. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
Smart City Podcast is what you're looking for.